Welcome to the Leadership Bootcamp podcast. This is Jeff Strauss. This is the inaugural Leadership Bootcamp podcast, so before we begin, please forgive any foibles or missteps I make in this recording or those in the near future as I learn the ins and outs of podcasting. Today I'll be speaking about Andy Jassy's memo to Amazon employees about RTO, or Return to Office. On September 16th, 2024, longtime Amazon employee and current CEO Andy Jassy sent a memo to Amazon employees about, quote, a couple changes we're making to further strengthen our culture and teams, unquote. I'd like to read the memo in full, it'll only take a few minutes, and then comment from a leadership, cultural, and organizational change perspective. Here's the memo. Hey team, I want to send a note on a couple changes we're making to further strengthen our culture and teams. First, for perspective, I feel good about the progress we're making together. Stores, AWS, and advertising continue to grow on very large bases. Prime Video continues to expand, and new investment areas like Gen AI, Kuiper, healthcare, and several others are evolving nicely. And at the same time we're growing and investing, we're also continuing to make progress on our cost structure and operating margins, which isn't easy to do. Overall, I like the direction in which we're heading and appreciate the hard work and ingenuity of our teams globally. When I think about my time at Amazon, I never imagined I'd be at the company for 27 years. My plan, which my wife and I agreed to on a bar napkin in 1997, was to be here a few years and move back to NYC. Part of why I've stayed has been the unprecedented growth. We had $15 million of annual revenue the year before I joined. This year should be well north of $600 billion. The perpetual hunger to invent, the obsession with making customers' lives easier and better every day, and the associated opportunities these priorities present. But the biggest reason I'm still here is our culture. Being so customer-focused is an inspiring part of it, but it's also the people we work with, the way we collaborate and invent when we're at our best, our long-term perspective, the ownership I've always felt at every level I've worked. I started as a level 5, the speed with which we make decisions and move, and the lack of bureaucracy in politics. Our culture is unique and has been one of the most critical parts of our success in our first 29 years. But keeping your culture strong is not a birthright. You have to work at it all the time. When you consider the breadth of our businesses, their associated growth rates, the innovation required across each of them, and the number of people we've hired in the last 6 to 8 years to pursue these endeavors, it's pretty unusual and will stretch even the strongest of cultures. Strengthening our culture remains a top priority for the S team and me, and I think about it all the time. We want to operate like the world's largest startup. That means having a passion for constantly inventing for our customers, strong urgency for most big opportunities, it's a race, high ownership, fast decision-making, scrappiness and frugality, deeply connected collaboration. You need to be joined at the hip with your teammates when inventing and solving hard problems, and a shared commitment to each other. Two areas that the S team and I have been thinking about the last several months are, 1, do we have the right org structure to drive the level of ownership and speed we desire? 2, are we set up to invent, collaborate, and be connected enough to each other and our culture to deliver the absolute best for customers and the businesses that we can? We think we can be better on both. On the first topic, we've always sought to hire very smart, high judgment, inventive, delivery-focused, and missionary teammates. We have always wanted the people doing the actual detailed work to have high ownership. As we have grown our teams as quickly and substantially as we have the last many years, we have understandably added a lot of managers. In that process, we have also added more layers than we had before. It's created artifacts that we'd like to change, e.g., pre-meetings for the decision meetings, a longer line of managers feeling like they need to review a topic before it moves forward, owners of initiatives feeling less like they should make recommendations because the decision will be made elsewhere, etc. Most decisions we make are two-way doors, and as such, we want more of our teammates feeling like they can move fast without unnecessary processes, meetings, mechanisms, and layers that create overhead and waste valuable time. So, we're asking each S-Team organization to increase the ratio of individual contributors to managers by at least 15% by the end of Q1 2025. Having fewer managers will remove layers and flatten organizations more than they are today. If we do this work well, it will increase our teammates' ability to move fast, clarify and invigorate their sense of ownership, drive decision-making closer to the front lines where it most impacts customers and the business, decrease bureaucracy, and strengthen our organization's ability to make customers' lives better and easier every day. We will do this thoughtfully, and our PXT team will work closely with our leaders to evolve our organizations to accomplish these goals over the next few months. By the way, I've created a bureaucracy mailbox for any examples any of you see where we might have bureaucracy or unnecessary processes that's crept in and we can root out. To be clear, companies need process to run effectively, and process does not equal bureaucracy, but unnecessary and excessive process or rules should be called out and extinguished. I will read these emails and action them accordingly. To address the second issue of being better set up to invent, collaborate, and be connected enough to each other and our culture to deliver the absolute best for customers in the business, we've decided that we're going to return to being in the office the way we were before the onset of COVID. When we look back over the last 5 years, we continue to believe that the advantages of being together in the office are significant. I've previously explained these benefits, but in summary, we've observed that it's easier for our teammates to learn, model, practice, and strengthen our culture. Collaborating, brainstorming, and inventing are simpler and more effective. Teaching and learning from one another are more seamless, and teams tend to be better connected to one another. If anything, the last 15 months we've been back in the office at least 3 days a week has strengthened our conviction about the benefits. Before the pandemic, not everybody was in the office 5 days a week every week. If you or your child were sick, if you had some sort of house emergency, if you were on the road seeing customers or partners, if you needed a day or two to finish coding in a more isolated environment, people worked remotely. This was understood and will be moving forward as well. But before the pandemic, it was not a given that folks could work remotely 2 days a week, and that will also be true moving forward. Our expectation is that people will be in the office outside of extenuating circumstances like the ones mentioned above, or if you already have a remote work exception approved through your S-Team leader. We are going to bring back assigned desk arrangements in locations that were previously organized that way, including the U.S. headquarters locations in Puget Sound and Arlington. For locations that had agile desk arrangements before the pandemic, including much of Europe, we will continue to operate that way. We understand that some of our teammates may have set up their personal lives in such a way that returning to the office consistently 5 days per week will require some adjustments. To help ensure a smooth transition, we're going to make this new exception active on January 2, 2025. Global Real Estate and Facilities is working on a plan to accommodate desk arrangements mentioned above, and will communicate the details as they are finalized. I want to thank our leaders and support teams in advance for the work they will do to improve their org structures over the coming months. With a company of our size and complexity, the work won't be trivial, and it will test our collective ability to invent and simplify when it comes to how we organize and go after the meaningful opportunities we have across all of our businesses. Having the right culture at Amazon is something I don't take for granted. I continue to believe that we are all here because we want to make a difference in customers' lives, invent on their behalf, and move quickly to solve their problems. I'm optimistic that these changes will better help us accomplish these goals while strengthening our culture and the effectiveness of our teams. Thanks, Andy. Okay, overall, I think the messaging here is well planned and structured. Jassy begins with an appeal to emotion. He's been at Amazon for nearly 3 decades, rising to the rank of CEO, so he clearly has an attachment and devotion to the company. He also mentions the caliber of employee and the strong culture, writing that Amazon hires very smart, high judgment, inventive, delivery-focused, and missionary teammates. And he mentions that, quote, "We have always wanted the people doing the actual detailed work to have high ownership," unquote. That's very important. Autonomy and self-efficacy are powerful motivators, and feeling like those are being taken away is a good way to start disengaging employees. Now, hopefully, the rank and file at Amazon also agree with these statements because it's not uncommon for an executive to write platitudes about how they perceive the culture from their perch, while the denser air down below has much more friction. Nevertheless, a good reminder of what the culture aims to be, and Jassy goes on to discuss how to get it closer to that target. First, flattening the organization. This is a common tactic, and though I feel like I'm betraying my middle management peers, it's an effective one. A management-heavy organizational structure is rarely as effective as it should be because there can be too many decision makers and not enough people doing the quote actual work. What's needed in a high-performing organization are seasoned leaders that know how to motivate, engage, and guide their teams to a goal, set a vision that everyone is aligned to, reduces or eliminates blockers for full throttle progress, imbues autonomy and accountability as team values, and can create strong cross-functional partnerships that enable high-impact work. This sounds great on paper, but there are two areas where this typically fails. First, it's not easy to find seasoned leaders. Leadership is not something one is inherently suited for or skilled in simply because they've been promoted into the position. A common problem I've seen in every company I've ever worked in is that some leaders are promoted into people management positions because they've excelled in their individual contributor roles. An individual contributor role is a role that doesn't manage anybody else. This doesn't make any sense. It's like promoting a flight attendant to be the pilot because they're good at their job. Leadership is a skill set all its own that requires the same kind of dedication to be successful as the time and effort put into becoming a successful individual contributor. This is, of course, assuming that a person promoted into a leadership position even wants to be a manager and a leader. Many do not want a people management opportunity. Now, second, reducing the amount of leaders generally means increasing the amount of people reporting to a single leader. There are numerous data on the topic of ideal team size. Generally, a single leader should not be leading a team larger than 7 to 10 people because the amount of individual attention in the form of feedback, development, guidance, and the general volume of work becomes untenable. It also becomes more difficult to plan and align as a team grows under a single leader. And what we tend to see is an individual contributor becoming a team lead, the single point of contact and a conduit for a manager into that team, that sort of sub-team, and through whom a manager can deliver a strategy to be executed. A single manager with numerous team leads reporting to them effectively maintains the hierarchical structure needed to remain effective at a large size while keeping the organization flat on the org chart. The team lead can even be, in some rare cases, a rotating position so that every eligible team member experiences this quasi-senior individual contributor role. So in summary on this point, flattening the organization will probably be effective if the organization is structured efficiently. In 2023, Mark Zuckerberg made a similar announcement about flattening the org at Meta. What Zuck did was a bit different, though. In addition to removing extraneous layers of management, he forced managers into individual contributor roles. This is also not unprecedented. If a manager is underperforming in their role as a leader, but was a stellar individual contributor, sometimes upper management will find an opportunity for that manager to return to an individual contributor role. In other cases, it's likely that a manager will elect to part ways with the company because a move back to individual contributor will be seen as a demotion. It could be a difficult transition to work alongside peers you've previously managed, both from a work and from an ego perspective. In many cases, but not all cases, but in many cases, moving from leadership to individual contributor will also come with a compensation decrease. In an interesting twist on the opposite case, individual contributor to leader, it can be difficult for a former manager to obtain the skill set required of an individual contributor. The late Andy Grove, former CEO of Intel, wrote in High Output Management that the higher you go in leadership, the more obsolete you become. Meaning, if you were once a subject matter expert as an individual contributor, and you've been a leader or a leader of leaders for some time, not only has your technical skill set atrophied for any number of reasons, like the demands of the job change, the tools changing, but if you've been managing a multidisciplinary team, it's simply impossible to be deeply involved in every aspect of the team's operations. And you start to lose some of that subject matter expertise because you are no longer approaching the work from that ground level. Now, moving on to the meat of the memo, return to office. This is a contentious topic for many, especially those who've become accustomed to working from home full-time or a majority of the time since the pandemic. Many large companies have returned to the office either full-time or part-time if they permit a hybrid work schedule. Companies like Netflix, Zoom, and Snapchat are three examples of global companies that have mandated return to office. And Amazon will be the latest of the FANG. FANG is an acronym for Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google. They'll be the latest FANG company to institute the policy. All the other companies in the acronym have instituted at least a hybrid work policy requiring a minimum of 3 days in the office. The data on RTO remains slightly tipped in favor of remote work, mostly focusing on employee well-being's impact on performance. Studies show that working from home can offer benefits like increased productivity for some tasks, increased job satisfaction and reduced attrition, and improved quality of life by some metrics. However, there are also negatives which have been suggested in the data. A study from 2019 concluded that the higher the percentage of coworkers working from home, the worse the performance of the individual employee as compared to the individual employee working from home when their colleagues do not. Other recent studies make similar conclusions related to poorer performance of teams when they're fully remote. We may see the body of evidence in favor of in-person work continue to grow post-pandemic, particularly as it relates to the performance of teams. Based on my personal experience, and certainly others have experienced this as well, there are important benefits to working in an office beyond the camaraderie, esprit de corps, positive cultural influences, and the comfort of managers knowing their teams are, quote, at work, which was one negative leadership perception of working from home. Situational awareness is crucial to a high-functioning team aligned to a shared vision. There is tremendous benefit to teams being physically organized in close proximity to each other, where a member of one team can simply walk up to a member of another team to ask a question, or members of one team can overhear a conversation potentially about something tangentially related, but nonetheless important to their own work. I myself have made interesting and important connections at previous jobs, literally at the coffee machine in the shared kitchen, that I would never have made working from home. Whether these factors impact performance is a question for further study, but my gut tells me there might be something there. Now, some jobs and industries are well suited for full remote work. Smaller companies that are not geographically dispersed in the same or close time zone, working a small set of products or projects, may work well fully remotely. It's possible that even a larger, geographically dispersed team of hundreds or even thousands may be highly functional in a fully remote environment if they're working on one or two products. But when you start to become a multi-product company like Amazon or grow beyond a certain size, it may start to make more sense to start working in person at least some of the time for the benefits I've spoken about. There may not be research to advance the rationale yet, so I'm interested to read about how RTO plans of these larger companies have affected their performance. I think Jassy does a good job acknowledging the difficulty of a transition back to the office and giving 3.5 months to make the transition. I think he should have used a phrase other than, quote, extenuating circumstances, unquote, to describe rather routine cases where an employee should, for all intents and purposes, be permitted to work outside of the office, like taking care of a child, dealing with an emergency, or requiring extreme focus, not conducive of a shared office environment. Though he doesn't mention other circumstances an employee could only work from home for, as in the case of a physical or neurological disorder, he does note that previous remote work exceptions would be honored, and from an equity and inclusion perspective, I suspect that these circumstances are implied. I'm curious whether hiring practices could change, consciously or unconsciously, based on the RTO mandate. Factors that required employees to work from home weren't necessarily considered as hiring criteria, and perhaps now they will be. Overall, I think the request is reasonable considering Amazon's size, distribution, product lines, maturity, and objectives. It's hard to tell if some of the desire is simply executive leadership wanting butts in seats, but if it is, that's their prerogative. Perhaps it will have a positive impact on performance and Amazon's overnight 4 to 8 a.m. drop off time will actually be a real thing. Shout out to all of the Amazon drivers out there who are, to quote Jassy, doing the actual detailed work. Those folks never had the option to work from home. So thanks so much for listening to this first episode of the Leadership Bootcamp podcast. If you found this useful, please subscribe to the channel and share this podcast on your social media platforms. It's really a huge support. Can't wait to do the next episode. Thank you.